Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Happy to welcome Alex Segura back to Word Balloon. Alex and I have known each other a really long time and have gone through the wars of comics and novels. And it's great to talk to him not only about his current comic work, but also a brand new novel that ties his worlds together, Secret Identity, a fun murder mystery that takes place in the 1970s world of comics. Good to see you, man.
Hey, man. Thanks so much for having me. It's always a treat.
Absolutely. This is has this always been in the back of your mind that eventually you do a comic book related novel? Because of course you've had Pete Fernandez and your other crime novels that have done so well, and alongside your comic book work.
Yeah, it's funny. I think when I first started to write novels, I just wanted to kind of see if I could do it. My first one, Silent City, was really a test to see if I could write a novel. But in the back of my mind, I always had this thought that maybe I would write a comic book noir. Because for me, my favorite books are, they transport you to other places. Like you meet other people, you're in different worlds and different industries. And I love noir. I love the idea of people being pushed to the brink and kind of painted into a corner and forced to see, make tough decisions. And I think the idea of noir has been watered down. Like it's become a marketing term. People say, oh, it's a crime book, it must be noir. But noir to me is a very specific thing. It's the idea that someone is forced to make these primal emotional decisions, and then they have to, pay the consequences or kind of fix whatever they've done. And so when I read Cavalier and Clay forever ago in college, I was in college. I had no idea I was going to become a writer. You dream of it. But I remember reading Chabon's book and just being so immersed in that world. And so he has this great way of creating this verisimilitude where you're reading the book and you kind of feel like the escapist could have happened. And my big takeaway from the book, aside from loving it, was I really wanted to read those comics. I wanted to read the escapist comics. And I know they did it eventually with Dark Horse, which was cool, but I wanted to read them in the novel. And so that always kind of buzzed around in my brain. So when I finished the Pete Fernandez books and I did the Star Wars novel, I knew my next thing was going to be either a standalone or a much shorter series. And the idea of doing a comic book noir came back. And that's kind of when Carmen, the protagonist, showed up in my mind. And that's when I really knew that it had to be in the 70s. It had to be in a time that was in really stark contrast to comics today and New York today. I mean, the New York of 1975 is vastly different from the New York of today. And so is comics. I mean, and that was fun. And I kind of went in thinking, okay, I'll know how to write this, but I realized I had to do a ton of research and I had to really kind of immerse myself in that world, which was a lot of fun. But yeah, that's kind of the origin of Secret Identity.
Well, and thankfully, too, I'm sure you, or maybe you didn't, but I would assume you touched base with a lot of the creators that we know that were working back then. I mean, that's the great thing about both DC and Archie, where you've worked. You've got so many vets that can tell you, secondhand about those times and everything. And I like, too, that in your world, DC and Marvel exist, but this Triumph, right?
Triumph. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Triumph is like a Charlton or Tower. Name your favorite.
Atlas. Yeah, exactly.
Of the day.
Yeah, the idea. So the I'll get to your question in a second, but the plot for Secret Identity is about this woman, this queer Cuban American woman, Carmen Valdez, who moves from Miami to New York to pursue her dream of writing comics. She grows up reading comics with her dad. It's a big part of her upbringing, like so many of us. And she gets a job at this third-rate publisher, this company called Triumph Comics, where she's the secretary to the CEO, president, this guy named Jeff Carlisle. And she makes it clear from the beginning she wants to write. She wants to write these stories. She wants to be part of the comic book industry. And the book opens kind of on a meeting between them where her boss basically says, look, I have a line out the door of friends and freelancers I have to keep fed. And how would it look if I gave my secretary work and not them? So it's definitely an intense dose of misogyny, whether he means it to be or not. And so she goes back home, is frustrated, and a colleague, her coworker, this guy Harvey, who's a junior editor at the company, shows up at her place and says, I've got this opportunity to write Triumph's first ever female superhero, and I know you want to write. I've seen you kind of pitching your stories. Do you want to co-write it with me? But the only wrinkle is he needs her to do it anonymously because obviously she's already gotten kind of hit the wall. And so Carlisle would flip if he found out that she had written it. But Carmen is very smart and she realizes that this is a problem. You know, she sees the red flags, but she's also, how tempting is the dream to finally achieve the dream? So she does it. They create this character called the Legendary Lynx, which Sandy Jarrell, who's an amazing artist that you know, does the interior sequences or comic book sequences spread out through the book. And the character becomes a huge hit, but then Harvey is murdered. And so Carmen has to basically put on the amateur detective hat and figure out what happened to her friend to reclaim her character. And, you know, I know comics, I know comic book history, obviously, and I've spent my entire professional career in comics, but I was not even alive in 1975. So it had to be, I had to really do my homework. I had the blessing of having so many friends that worked in comics at the time. You know, like Paul Levitz gave the manuscript to read, and he was very clear. He's like, I'm not reading this to give you editorial notes. I'm just fact checking it for you. And he was great about that.
Great.
Stuart Moore, and then a lot of creators that I just ended up having conversations with, like Jerry Conway was very generous with his time and gave me some fun anecdotes. Scott Edelman, who spent a lot of time in the Marvel bullpen and editorial right around that time. He actually gave me a great anecdote about throwing a steaming cherry pie at a colleague and almost getting fired. And that's in the book. I mean, it's obviously not credited to him, but and then a lot of women that worked in comics because, you know, I'm a man, I'm writing a female character, and I wanted to be as honest and truthful as possible. So I wanted to speak to women that worked in comics at the time. Linda Fight, who wrote The Cat, the first few issues of The Cat.
Absolutely.
She was
Herbie,
great.
Wasn't she Herb Trimpe's former, weren't they together for a while?
I don't know. I think so.
I
Yeah.
certainly know Linda Fight. Absolutely. Continue. Excuse me.
Yeah. No, she was so helpful and so generous with her time. And really, I just walked her through the plot and I said, how, you know, us murder aside, how plausible is this? And she was very helpful. And, you know, Louise Simonson, Laurie Sutton, who worked at the Comics Code Authority.
Wow.
Karen Berger, who obviously came in a little bit later, early 80s, but still could give great context about what it was like kind of coming into comics. As a woman in comics. And so that was supremely helpful. And, you know, and Sean Howe, who wrote Marvel, The Untold Story, I obviously read and reread that book. But one of the things that tipped me off to maybe doing it in the 70s was that book, because he wrote so lovingly about the 70s and kind of the Wild West mentality of those comics, like this era where there was just not that much editorial oversight because it wasn't the days of media exploitation. Like nobody was thinking, oh, well, this character is going to be a movie soon, so we can't do that. It was more like we have to meet this deadline and get the book on newsstand. So yeah, do whatever you want. We just need to print the book. And so that was really fun. And it added so much texture to the story. It just made it feel much more like it could have happened. And that was my dream, to, you know, have people read the book and kind of squint and say, was there a Legendary Lynx comic? Was there a Triumph Comics? You know?
No, that's great. And also, I think the 70s, and again, the likelihood is that it was still happening maybe in subsequent decades, but you really had the old guard still hanging around in the 70s and still cranking out stories, both art and scripts. And you had this new group, the real first generation that had grown up reading them. They were trying to break in as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, all the baggage that came with the 70s of being, you know, kind of the hangover of the hippie generation and the Vietnam generation. And
Watergate, yeah. And New York in particular was just in this financial ruin. Like Gerald Ford had just told the city to drop dead.
Yep.
Crime rates were super high. And so that's a New York that people now don't really recognize, because New York now is, you know, there's crime, but like any other place, it's not Fear City, basically.
No, I forget the name of the HBO show about the porno industry in New York in the 70s.
Oh, The Deuce. Yeah.
The Deuce, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I love talking to Chaikin about The Deuce because he's always like, I can almost see myself in the background. That's how authentic it is. That, like, you know, because he lived it and everything. So
yeah, it was an interesting time.
Absolutely, man. No, I think it's a great idea, and truly, you deliver. You know what you're doing
at
this point, and yeah, well, you know, again, I've enjoyed a lot of your mystery novels. Have you made a playlist music
I
playlist?
have. Yeah. It's funny because, and you know this, I create a lot. I don't listen to music while I write, but I think about music a lot while I'm writing. So, I'll keep putting together like a music playlist, adding songs, and a lot of them are from the era, like Patti Smith, the Ramones, Talking Heads, stuff like that, but also newer stuff like Phoebe Bridgers and St. Vincent, just whatever's kind of getting my brain pumping in terms of the work. But the music scene is a big part of the novel too. I mean, they go to CBGB for a minute. Carmen's roommate is in a band that kind of plays those clubs, and so we got to touch on that. Excuse me, we got to touch on those themes as well, which was a lot of fun to a music nerd like me.
That's great. And so, is it on Spotify? Is your
Yeah,
playlist on
yeah.
Spotify?
I'll send you the link for sure.
Cool, man. No, that's great. And I mean, have you how are you engaging with your audience beyond doing podcasts like this and everything? But I mean, again, you've been writing a good series of novels. I mean, what is this, your seventh novel?
Yeah,
Eighth
my
novel?
seventh book. That's
There
crazy.
you go, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
crazy. So yeah, how
Engage.
do you engage with your audience?
Social media has become really interesting. I think it's become, a little, I don't want to say challenging to navigate. It's just, I try to be positive. I try to keep it as positive as I can, just sharing things I like and sharing things I want to talk about. And that's, I engage with a lot of readers on Twitter. I have a newsletter that is pretty active. I do Facebook and Instagram. I think I'm aged out of TikTok. I don't think I could do that
Who are you
successfully.
talking to? Good Lord.
Yeah,
Good
I mean,
Lord.
I've just kind of cut that off at the pass. But social media is a big way to engage, and in this age when I'm not doing that many events, like doing a ton of virtual events like this, you really kind of you really established a rhythm. Once the pandemic started, you upped your content, and that was great. I think people responded so well to that. So I've been doing a ton of those book events. I did one at the Strand in person, which was
Nice.
amazing. But I have two young kids. One of them's not vaccinated. It's a challenge to do events. But
Sure. Yeah.
that's and also some people will reach out through my website, especially after reading the book, and that's always fun.
Boucher is a great mystery novelist convention.
Yeah.
Were they online during the pandemic? Did they do stuff?
Yeah, the last two were, there was one that was cut short right as the pandemic was hitting, and then they were going to do the next one in person. And, I think that was when Delta started to really ramp up and before the vaccines. So it became much more stressful. But I think this one coming up is going to be in person. So I'll be there, which will be exciting. But
Well, that's great.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not doing a ton of them, but I do miss seeing like the community, comics and mystery and both, just seeing your friends and connecting with people.
Are you going to do any comic conventions to promote Secret Identity? It would seem like that's natural.
Yeah. I'm hoping to be at San Diego. I'm hoping to do a few of the stuff later this year. I was hoping I'll try to make it up to Terrificon when it just to kind of swoop in, because I like that show, and I like the guests are great. Yeah, you just have to dip your toe in a little more cautiously than you would have a couple years ago. It's a whole new world, as you know better than anyone. It's just been crazy.
Well, and I went to, I mean, it was in my backyard. I went to C2E2 in December. I did last year.
How was it?
It was interesting because it was not, it was sparsely attended. But otherwise, I mean, it was, same old. But yeah, I mean, both from a guest standpoint and an attendee standpoint, I think because of Delta and stuff, people were still nervous. But it was fine. And I mean, right now, God, I don't know, man. I don't know if I'm going to be at San Diego, because it's San Diego and then Terrificon the next week and C2E2 the following week. That could kill me. So,
yeah, now that when you say that, I might just end up just doing Terrificon because it's in my backyard. I can drive up to Connecticut and just be there.
Yeah.
And that's always a good show. It's just hard. I think a lot of authors and comic creators had to recalibrate how they engage with people, especially artists that make a living like doing the convention circuit and making money off those sketches. Like,
yes.
I think you're seeing a lot of them do that stuff virtually or as best they can. It's just been a lot of them got hit really hard. It's a challenge.
How about you mentioned your Star Wars novel and everything? Is there a celebration happening this year? Or is it every 2 years? I always forget.
There is one this year. I think I mean, there's a lot of bummers related to the pandemic, but the Star Wars novel came out just as the pandemic was starting, so I didn't. That was when we were first learning to do like virtual events. But I was really excited about going to Celebration. Maybe one of these years. I have a short story in an upcoming anthology that's cool. I got to read it's called Stories of the Sith and the Jedi. So I got to write one of the Jedi stories, which was really neat. I love playing in that sandbox. I mean, I think as a comics person, I'm more tuned into like being able to just play with other people's toys, like you're used to just doing like work for hire stuff, and also kind of shifting into my own crime things. But yeah, so that's exciting.
That's cool. And you were at Archie for a long time, and prior to that DC, but now you're at Oni. And
yeah,
how are things going at Oni?
It's good. I can't believe it's going to be a year next month, which time really flies. I feel like I just kind of signed up there, but it's, I really love it because you get to kind of partner with the creators on their vision. It's a creator-owned house. Talent comes to us, writers and artists come to us with their ideas, and we help them actualize it in the same way that a lot of creator-owned companies do. But I've only worked at IP-driven places before that. DC obviously isn't, owns their characters to most of the degree, and Archie does as well. So it was really about, what does the company want for their characters, and now It's kind of inverted, which is interesting. And it's just a whole different. It's such a diverse library of books by genre, by creator. I really love it. I think it's a good group of people. And I'm working from home full time, which is interesting.
Wow, sure, absolutely. Do you see yourself doing crime comics? I mean, again, you've done crime novels now for a good period of time.
Yeah, I'd like to. I mean, there's such a great history of crime comics, like whether it's Brubaker and Phillips or David Lapham or 100 Bullets or, so many, and the stuff that Rosenberg and Tyler Boss are doing. I'd have to find the right story. Like, I wouldn't want it to just be, okay, he's doing Pete Fernandez as a comic. Like, I would love to see that at some point, but it would have to be something that I could kind of let roll for a long time. But I've thought about it. I've had a few conversations with artists just about doing something. Maybe I'll dip my toe in with like some anthologies or things like that.
Okay, I understand. And I don't know, have we ever talked about, at the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about noir. Have you dipped into radio, radio noir? I mean, it's, there's some great stuff from the 40s and 50s.
Oh, no, tell me more. Like, I mean, yeah.
I'm happy to. Well, honestly, one of the best actors, and also he was a big producer impact on radio detectives, and I think very, very noirish stuff. Jack Webb, before he was doing Dragnet, he had a character.
Really?
He had a character called Pat Novak. And Pat Novak rented boats in San Francisco and was like in the seedy part of the docks area and everything. And I almost, in fact, I was writing about it on Twitter the other night because I was listening to a few. And in my mind, even though it came before Joe Friday, Jack Webb, he's got that voice, and every character sounds like Joe Friday. But I'm like, what if Pat Novak were after Dragnet and he's a disgraced cop just trying to make a living and stuff?
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, but as you say, it's people that make wrong choices, and the consequences are there, and femme fatales, and just the usual bunch. His one of his street informers is a alcoholic ex-priest, Jocko Madigan.
Oh, wow.
And
that's great.
It's a lot of fun. Steve Grant, actually, I remember a few years ago, did a fun Pat Novak comic book, but that's a great example. The Sam Spade radio show is really good. Howard Duff, tremendous as Sam Spade, and the Philip Marlowe radio show is really terrific. It was really interesting alongside the RKOs and all the great noirs that were being cranked out, Fox and the other studios that were doing it. Radio really kind of, I think, took a page. And even though obviously a lot of it is that atmospheric stuff and the limitations of broadcasting, in terms of, the girls couldn't be that, there weren't that many. Well, there were the occasional infidelities and things.
Yeah, it couldn't be that risque.
Yeah, but it's great. No, it really is. But I would start with Jack Webb. And
I'm going to check it out. I mean, I wrote that podcast that was kind of like a YA teen, crime noir, and that was really fun to write drama for radio because the cues are so different. Like in comics, you're hinging on the visual. Like you need the artist to really be the director of the movie, and with audio, it's everything has to be kind of teed up by sound. The creaking of the door, the announcing like, "Hey, John, how are you?" Like, the little things like that you pick up as you go. But that was really fun and a fun way to write because it just changes the way you lose a sense. You lose a lot of the senses, and you're relying completely on audio, which is a simplistic way to put it, but it really changes how you write.
No question. And also in these old time radio examples, it's a lot of first person narrative because of that.
Yeah.
So they are the detective usually is carrying the story and stuff. A lot of great metaphors in Pat Novak as well. Is like it was as deserted as a warm beer,
Yeah.
on a bar, on a bar or whatever. Very funny shit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's Marlowe. Those are Marlowe stories, and they evoke the same kind of vibe, or Jim Thompson, or
Exactly.
Ross McDonald. But with Secret Identity, I wanted to make it much more atmospheric and character driven. The Pete novels are character driven, but they're also very action heavy. There's cars exploding, people getting killed. It's not for the meek, I guess. But I wanted this to be a little bit of a slower boil and much more about the character and her world, and obviously there's a murder and there's a villain, but it's about the complexities of different people and kind of the gray areas that we all have between each other. So that was fun. It was much more of like a Highsmith novel set in comics as opposed
There you go.
to like a big action thriller.
Yes, and I was thinking like Cornell Woolrich and everything as well.
Or Margaret Millar, who I wish more people knew about her. I mean, her book Beast in View, I think, is the spark that created stuff like Gone Girl or Girl on the Train with the unreliable narrator, and she was doing it like years and years before, and that to me has one of the best twist endings of any crime novel I've ever read.
That's cool. I've been listening to, I believe it's called The Secret Life of Hollywood.
Oh yeah,
British. I don't know if you know about that podcast. It's great, and the guy he'll come out with an episode, and literally it's 9 hours long. I don't know how he does it, but it's like an entire look at Hitchcock from the moment he came to America till the end of his life. And right now I'm in the early 60s and stuff, but lots of great stories. And of course, I'm a big Katrina.
I was just going to say, yeah,
Longworth fan. Yeah.
That's a great podcast. You must remember this.
I guess I haven't listened to it yet. She's interviewed by Gilbert Gottfried this week on his podcast, and he loves old movies. He's real. I mean, it is Gilbert. You can't get away from that. But I like Gilbert. I think he's funny, and I mean, truly very passionate about classic movies and classic TV and stuff. So.
Oh, neat. Yeah, I'll have to listen to that. I know the new season started. I think it starts tomorrow, actually.
I think you're right. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's going to be exciting. No, she's great.
Yeah,
she's amazing.
Really great narrator and great writer. I mean, she writes all the episodes. So
yeah, and I mean, really one of my inspirations for doing my monkeys thing. Although I'm going to be, it's not a one-hander. I'm not just going to narrate myself and cut to interviews. I've got a co-host that really did the bulk of the interviews with the monkeys and everything.
Yeah.
So
I can't wait. That's going to be so much
fun.
Thanks,
man. Well, you're going to be part of it. So
yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, it'll be cool. I mean, my little drop of monkeys history, but it was cool.
That's awesome, man. So you just contributed to Marvel in one of their upcoming anthologies?
Yeah, I have a short story in the Marvel Voices Comunidades book, which is their Latinx themed one shot, and I had a Sunspot story that I love the New Mutants. I love the X-Men. I grew up a Marvel kid, so getting a chance to write a short story with Sunspot, the team was really fantastic too. And it really is a nod to his origin story and just kind of what happened to him and what he left behind when his powers materialized and he had to kind of rush off. It's literally, it pulls from scenes right from the Marvel graphic novel when you first meet the New Mutants, and you see Bobby kind of playing soccer and you see his potential, and then you see him kind of get bullied and then become Sunspot and is outed as a mutant. So it touches on all those themes without feeling too retro, but that was really a fun, just an honor to be able to play in that space. And yeah, I mean, it was wild.
And is that being released on Free Comic Book Day? Is that the plan?
It's out. It came out a couple months ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Terrific. Okay, cool. Because also I know they've got a Pride. They got a Pride anthology coming up as well.
Mm-hmm.
I know that.
Yeah, they've been doing a great job with like these different themed one shots.
Yeah, man, it's about time. God, it's funny as we certainly George Perez is on our minds and part of the conversation back and forth. And I was telling a friend that my beyond the obvious and talking to George, I'm like, I want to know everything about the White Tiger, the original White Tiger.
Oh yeah,
And
what a
that was
great
his
character.
first. Yeah, man. I'm a I was kind of bummed the way Bendis played him out. And I mean he introduced the legacy character taking over and stuff. But I always liked those stories in Deadly Hands of Kung Fu and everything.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and when he showed up in was it Spectacular? He was in the main Amazing book for a couple issues too, and that was really cool. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. No, definitely. I only
know. I mean, I've been reading a ton of since the last time we spoke. I still kept reading Spider-Man issues.
There's a ton to get through, so I can
exactly.
I can appreciate that, man. No, that's outstanding. Very, very cool. Talking to Alex Segura and talking about his novels and his comics as well. I'm going to take a quick break, and we'll come back in just a second and have more conversation. And if you have questions, come on in.
Every part of comics and artwork is a form of communication with other people. It's not just here, let me direct my thoughts at you as a dictation of concept, but it's hoping to convince you of how cool you think a visual could be or a story could be. And you're trying to communicate ideas. In one part storytelling and greater part just graphic impact, you're hoping to relate a sense of energy, urgency, and enthusiasm to people. That there's a lightning of spirit that comes out of superheroes that has always worked for me. That it isn't really about the practicality of what they might do. It's not the practicality about grown men punching each other in costumes. It really isn't about that. It's a visual metaphor. And that metaphor could be for a lot of things, but it's mostly just about the energy and enthusiasm that can be found in the fun of life.
That was cool.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it, man. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, it could be worse. You're looking at beautiful Alex Ross art.
Absolutely. The audio, the listeners sadly don't get the benefit of watching the Alex Ross art, and they are subject to different commercials. But absolutely, man. No, see, there's another reason to listen or to watch.
Yeah,
on YouTube, man. Every now and then you get
do it both. Do both of them.
Hey, why not? Absolutely, man. So, talking to Alex about Secret Identity, the new novel, and also recent comic book work as well. The scheduling of novels, it usually is like a year or two from submitting the script and the galleys, and then it coming out. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, this was interesting because I didn't have to write the whole book on spec. I knew I needed to find a new publisher. It's out with Flatiron Books, which is one of the big publishers. But I wrote a partial, which means, I wrote about a chunk of the book and then outlined the rest. And when we were pitching it around, I knew I wanted to kind of show proof of concept, to show how the comic book sequences would fit. So in the outline, I had the sequences where the comics would be, but I knew Sandy was the guy to draw it because Sandy is not only a fantastic artist, period. He has a great sense of history, of comic book history. He does these fantastic mock showcase covers that evoke like the era and the style and the font. And so he gets his attention to detail has always been really strong. So I reached out to him and I said, this is what I'm doing. It's going to have sequences in the comic book being created in the story. And the comic and the prose are going to be in conversation because I didn't want it to just be perfunctory. I didn't want it to just be, oh, Alex knows comic people, so he's just weaving this in there to show off. I wanted the comic book parts to feel essential. So if you read one but not the other, you're kind of missing out. So to get back to that, he did a spec page, kind of like a proof of concept page that then Taylor Esposito lettered, and we included it in the pitch. And that was right around when the pandemic was starting. I mean, I had just finished the Poe Dameron book had just come out. I knew this was going to be my next thing, and then we sold it. But then, then you have to finish the book, then you have to print the galleys, and then you have to get to the final copies, and that's a whole journey, and one that was a little new to me because the Pete novels had always been on a smaller indie press that still had great distribution and reach, but now you're with kind of the big leagues, and they have this whole machinery that I'd never really experienced before, which was cool. But in terms of timeline, you have to really be ready well in advance. So like my next book's probably not coming out until late. My next crime novel is not coming out until late next year, but I need to be done with it pretty soon.
Okay. Understood. When you contribute to anthologies as a writer, not a comic book anthology, but as a novel, or short story collection.
Yeah.
like, are you compensated for those? I'm always curious because I know some of them are, hey, let's all get together and put something out, and I
Yeah.
have no idea, but I mean, yeah, from a writer, aspiring writer
Usually, I mean, unless sometimes they're for charity, and you kind of give your
Sure.
stipend to the charity. But for something like one of my shorts was collected in Best American Mystery Stories last year, which was an amazing honor. But you get paid. You get a nice reprint fee, which is amazing. And usually you get something. I mean, I think there are some outfits that try to get everyone to write for free, but you want to give something to your authors. You want them to feel like they're compensated for their time, even if it's not commensurate with the time they put into it. You want it to feel like you're getting something at least.
I understand. Michael wants to know and assumes that that shot of the Empire State Building on the cover of Secret Identity, that's a shout out to Cavalier and Clay.
It's meant to evoke it in some way, but yeah. Cavalier and Clay was a huge influence. I mean, that book was just. I love that book. I love Chabon's work. His first two novels were also really huge influences. Mysteries of Pittsburgh and Wonder Boys was a great peek at the publishing industry, and I followed him since then. So in my mind, Triumph Comics exists in the same universe as The Escapist in those books too.
That's cool. Have you had a chance to meet him yet?
I've never met him. We've chatted briefly, or kind of replied or back and forth on Twitter, but nothing like huge. But I'm a big fan. He's just an amazing writer, and so it owes a great debt to Cavalier and Clay.
I'm a big fan of his novels and his short stories. Man, I'm not enjoying his point of view on Star Trek. I have to confess.
Man, well, it's not for everyone. Yeah,
that's okay. He's still a brilliant writer, and I'm still a massive fan, and that's okay. But
yeah, exactly.
Have you had a chance to watch Moon Knight yet?
I watched the first episode. I mean, this. I don't watch a ton of TV, but I watched the first episode over the weekend, and I really liked it. I love the Mensch Sienkiewicz run. I think that was it's really underrated, and I'm glad it's getting its due now. That's kind of when you saw Bill really step out of being a sort of not proto Neil Adams, but very much evoking Neil and then becoming Bill before he got to New Mutants, and he really cut loose with Claremont. I love it, and I also really like the Jeff Lemire run. The Bendis run with
Jeff and I were just talking about that this afternoon. Please continue.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, he does a really nice job of twisting the idea of being trapped in an asylum and playing into the strengths of the character. And the one thing that Jeff does really well is he knows the history of the characters he's playing with. So he gives you like little nods to things that date back to the Sienkiewicz run, like Crowley and, Frenchie and all these characters that were key players in the main run. And I just reread Werewolf by Night, his first appearances in Werewolf by Night, Don Perlin drew. And it's really amazing to me how much of the character is there at the beginning. Like, you get a sense that he's a conflicted, tortured guy who is not making the best decisions in his life. And then it goes right into the main Moon Knight series, which I like. And I was hoping to reread before the show, but the show I thought was a lot of fun. I thought, Oscar Isaacs is a great actor. It's a nice blend of all the different iterations of Moon Knight, and it had a great cliffhanger at the end of the first episode.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more on all of that.
Have you liked the latest Disney Plus stuff, like WandaVision? And yeah, I thought WandaVision was fascinating.
Yeah, exceptional. No, I agree, and it's great to see because first of all, it was great comfort during the pandemic.
Oh yeah,
there was so much great content and everything, but it really. They still feel like Marvel movies in the best way, and also I think are showing the versatility of what you could do within the superhero realm, and that's why. And I want your thoughts on this. You probably remember 2013. I remember people were really saying, maybe we're hitting the oversaturation because Scott Pilgrim didn't, meet expectations.
Yeah.
That's when The Wolverine came out. One of the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies came out during that period, and it was just but I mean, I'm like, this is like the Western in terms of we're just at the beginning. Thank God the right TV and movie people have shown within the shell of a superhero you could tell a heist story, you could tell a romance, you could do whatever. God, Hawkeye was
fun. That was really fun. Yeah,
it was a fantastic Christmas story. It's like, oh my God, they can even do that. Good for them. So
I mean, the superhero genre is flexible as hell. Like you can do any kind of story. You can do a hard-boiled noir like Born Again or Daredevil the show, or you can do something a little more lighthearted, or something really trippy like WandaVision, or something tongue-in-cheek like Peacemaker. And really that's one of the things too with Secret Identity. Like we live in a golden age of media of these characters. Who would have thought? I never would have thought as a kid that Peacemaker and Ant-Man would have TV shows or movies. Like I was just happy that there was a Batman movie, or there might be a Spider-Man movie. So thinking back to like 1975, that wasn't even on the radar. I mean, it was before the direct market even became a thing. And I think people forget how transitional comics were. You got them at the newsstand. If you didn't find the book you wanted, you got something else. And then you put it in your back pocket once you were done and threw it in the garbage. Like unless you were a super fan, there was no secondary market yet.
No, and also, you're right in terms of the randomness sometimes of what you read, and you're either you could be reading a middle issue of a story. Most stories would wrap up in 1 or 2 issues.
Yeah,
but every now and then you would get one that it was like, I didn't read that first issue of Hellstorm, and here we are. Okay, fine, whatever.
Yeah,
and,
you just dive in. Yeah, like
right.
So many people say my first comic was a random issue of X-Men or Avengers, and I had no clue what was going on, but I also had no way to go back. You couldn't go back. And so part of the art is, as a writer, was teeing up what happened, like who these people are, why they are this way in a page or two, because you didn't have room to get into it. And, another book that was really helpful was Dan Guarino's comic shop history. He wrote an entire history of the direct market, but that even went further back to like Phil Seuling kind of creating these small shows that kind of spurred the secondary market. And then the effect the direct market had on these companies like DC and Marvel then started to produce books just for the direct market. And that changed the game, because then they became collectible. You would go to a comic shop and you could find other issues that you wanted. You could fill out your collection, as opposed to, even when I was a kid, I went to a newsstand at first. I would go to like the pharmacy or the Eckerd Drugs and pick up and see what was around. I didn't have a comic shop. But when I got a comic shop, that changed my entire approach to being a fan. And so 1975 was a very different time. It was very much like, let's just crank these books out. Let's be as creative as we can be, but we have to reestablish everything with every issue. You can't have a ton of, there were no comic shops to really hold that foundation down.
Plus, you had both in the case of DC, you had the DC explosion, and then immediately followed by the implosion, and that was a shame, because they really took a moment to really expand beyond superheroes, and that's when a lot, Claw was a great kind of example of that, the sword and sorcery stuff and the fantasy stuff and the crime. And that's when Kaluta and O'Neill did their amazing Shadow comics.
Oh, those are so good.
Oh, the best, honestly. And I remember all that. And I felt the same way, man. When I don't know, again, we don't want to sound like old men yelling clouds, but for real, when the direct market happened, it really was exciting. And like, wait a minute, what is this? Oh yeah, that's Moon Knight, perfect example. It's a direct market book.
Yeah,
it's not available on newsstands. Or the Baxter paper editions of Batman and the Outsiders and Teen Titans and the Legion of Superheroes and stuff. And it's like, wow, man, they kind of give a shit more about comics than ever before.
Yeah, and also I think a lot of people. Yeah, and I think a lot of people also don't realize what a flawed business model the newsstand was. I mean, it's a challenging business even today. You have to basically overprint to sell. Going in, it's all about sell-through percentage. So if you overprint by X amount, but you still make a profit, you're good. But you're always going to lose copies. Those are the comics that got the covers ripped off and then dumped because nobody picked them up, and then those became their own kind of secondary market before there were comic shops. So all that stuff was really interesting to me. There was only so much I could touch on in the book, because I didn't want it to become like a Wikipedia book, like where,
you don't want to lose sense of your story.
Yeah, it's still a mystery.
Building the atmosphere of what was going on.
But I wanted it to feel like it was happening at that time. And that was one of the challenges, because I reference a lot of creators and a lot of different iconic comics of the time, but I wanted to create an atmosphere, as opposed to, hey, Jim Starlin, this is who he is, bio, ... and then go into the plot. I wanted the characters to talk about these people as if they were just known because they were fans. And then I wanted the reader, if it wasn't someone like us who knows these people and is into the comics, would then do their own little research and kind of figure out what these books are about. And I've heard from readers already who've said, I Googled a lot of these names, and I'm reading them. Now I'm reading like Warlock by Jim Starlin, or now I'm reading Denny and Neil's Batman stuff, which is, that was the one time I gave myself a fanboy moment and just there's a moment where Carmen's sitting in with an editor at Triumph, and he hands her a copy of the first Denny and Neil Batman, and he kind of goes on this little soliloquy about how important that run was. And that was the one little fanboy moment I allowed myself in the book, but I think it worked.
That's awesome. I think it
Yeah.
worked too.
Yeah.
And mentioning Neil, by the way, and God, I heard this weekend that he's in the hospital with sepsis.
Oh, geez.
That's pretty serious. So
Yeah.
our thoughts are with Neil and everything.
Yeah.
And, you know, yeah, I've always had very good encounters with Neil, and he's been on Word Balloon many times. And
yeah, those interviews are great.
Great historian. Oh my God. Michael points out Plop had to be the weirdest DC comic in the 70s. Plop
Yeah, I would say
was
so.
great. Plop
Yeah.
was hilarious, man. Definitely.
Yeah, and this was also like at the time, like we were still kind of feeling the ramifications of Kirby going to DC. You know, how would Marvel survive? You know, there was a lot of back and forth, and so I wanted to treat it like this is happening in real time. So it was less about like explaining who these people were, and more just kind of you're catching wind of a conversation that you don't have all the details on yet.
Yeah, I mean, no, you're right. I mean, it's the atmosphere of the moment, and obviously that was part of the chatter and stuff. Have creators that are name dropped in the book, have they said, hey, they're
I did mention to Jerry that he was name dropped in there, and Paul read it, and he's mentioned in passing. So, and there's a moment where Jeffrey Carlisle references going to a poker game with Len and Marv. So that was, because they had these legendary poker games. So I thought, why wouldn't they like maybe invite the head of Triumph Comics at least one time?
Have you seen the Jeffrey Jones documentary that Maria Carbonaro made about 10 years ago? I believe it was called Better Things.
No, not yet.
Man, she was able to find, talking to people like Linda Reinhold, Bill's wife, who was part of the scene back then in the 70s, the amount of great like photographs of like these fantastic creator parties that were happening in New York in the 70s.
Oh man, I need to check that out.
Everybody is a baby in that, and it's so great, man. Louise Simonson looks amazing, and I mean, my God, she was Marsha Brady. I mean, still a lovely woman and a terrific person. Really, the Simonsons are so great, but it's so great seeing them all as kids and just getting started in the biz. I mean, Louise was there with Warren before all her Marvel stuff and everything. But it's
sometimes Jackie Estrada will post a bunch of Comic-Con retro photos from. I mean, she'd been part of the con from the early years, and those are always fun to see just how people have changed. And I did a lot of deep dives. I read a ton of comic book history books, but I think the most valuable research I did was talking to people that were there and just getting the color. Like any, I have a journalism background, so I kind of. You can always get the facts right, but it's the texture and the talking to people and what were the little anecdotes, like, like that pie in the face, or Louise told me about the volleyball games between Marvel and DC at Central Park. And I thought, well, why wouldn't Triumph play one of those games? And so there's a scene at one of those games where Carmen's in the, playing the game and she gets, she's in the game. And it's just one of these things that adds to the community vibe of like New York was the hub of comics at that time. And so it was really fun to play in that world. So much so that the next one's going to be a sequel.
That's excellent. That's great to hear. Fantastic. God, no, I'm dying. Matthew Klickstein has a history of Comic-Con book that's coming out in the fall.
Oh, cool.
And it's kind of a companion. I don't know if you heard that podcast that he made. He made it for XM Sirius, a terrific 8-part look at the history specifically of the San Diego Con.
Oh, I'll check it out. Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Excellent. It's really good. And I mean, it kind of got, I think, lost in the shuffle, as will happen sometimes with podcasts. You know how it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to get a footprint, and then your episodes load up after a couple weeks, and then it's hard. There's no, in the publicity speak, there's no like secondary bite. How do you re-promote the episodes? You can just say they're still here, but you need to get that initial burst of press coverage.
Now, you've been involved with a podcast that NPR does, and actually it's an NPR show as well, Planet Money. And they had the really fun idea, because they saw everything that was happening with the promotion and successful exploitation of intellectual properties in TV and movies. And why don't you explain it better than as?
Thanks for bringing it up. It's so last year, or about a year ago, a little over a year ago, Kenny Malone, who's a friend of mine, he used to work at in Miami radio, and we knew each other there. He said he's on Planet Money. He's a co-host of Planet Money, and he said we're doing a podcast series on superhero IP and how companies like Marvel and DC and so on use these characters that have been around forever, and they become these huge moneymakers through media, through movies or television or what have you. And then he said the hook is going to be, we're going to try and buy a character from Marvel or DC or somebody. And they interviewed me in my role as co-president at Archie, and I basically said, no one's going to sell you anything. It's just not going to happen. And at first they were like, well, why? And my point was, you're one good story away from $1 billion industry. I mean, you look at something like Rocket Raccoon or like any character that was maybe like a B or C level character in the comics, but became a star once they were on the screen because the story was good and it was evocative. So I said, no one's going to sell you anything. And that was kind of the first episode. And they didn't get any responses, which was not a surprise. And offline, they said, well, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, there's the public domain. Like, just grab a character from the public domain, make it your own, copyright it, trademark it, have your own version of whatever, and then it's yours. And I think the idea was that they were going to take the character and make it into a comic book. And so they did that, and they found this character from the Golden Age called Microface, who was created by
I want you to, if you can, name check the creator, and also if you can remember the publisher too. But go on.
Yeah, it was written and drawn by Alan Ulmer, who was a veteran comic book writer artist from the time. I think it was a Nidor publication. I could be wrong, but it was one of these many Golden Age characters that showed up for a hot minute and disappeared because that was the churn. It was like the pulps. Like, companies would crank out so much stuff. There were studios set up just to feed the publishers, like Eisner and all these greats had their own little like shops where they would crank out these comics, and so it had kind of fallen into the public domain. And NPR, Planet Money, they grabbed the copyright and the trademark, and they were going to create their own comic. And would you help us, like, kind of put it together? And I said, we have 3 ways to go with it. You can either do it straight. You can continue the adventures of the Golden Age Microface, Tom Wood, and set it in the era and make it very period authentic. You could start completely afresh and just say this is the new Microface and has no connection to anything. Or you could make it a legacy hero. You can make it a character who's like the grandson of Tom Wood and who then has to pick up the mantle of Microface. And I was really keen on that. As a guy who grew up reading DC and, all those kind of characters, I love the Justice Society and just the idea of legacy and superheroics. And they said, okay, well, who do you think should design the costume? I said, well, the only person that comes to mind is Jerry Ordway. Like, Jerry is when you think of like legacy superheroes and redefining legacy heroes for the modern day or the Justice Society or those kind of characters, Jerry comes to mind. And so we reached out to Jerry, and he came up with this great design for the new character, the mysterious Microface, who is this guy, Sam Salazar. He's an NPR reporter, but he's the grandson of the original Microface. He doesn't know that yet. And so Jerry did the designs, and then we got Jamal Eigel to do the interiors, and we just actually sent it to the printer not long ago. And so it'll be up on the NPR site fairly soon. But the idea is, you meet Sam Salazar, and he's a reporter, and he's working on investigating. The thing about Planet Money, I should say as an aside, is all these, they want the story to have some business, vibe to it. It's got to talk about business and the economy in a not boring way. So Sam Salazar is investigating this private equity firm that is preying on these defunct companies, and he's not sure why they're doing it. And he starts to figure out that they're doing it to get weapons. Like, each of these companies, which are little winks and nods to former Golden Age publishers, and this private equity firm is collecting these companies to take these weapons and then do bad things with them. But then he also discovers he is the next Microface, and he becomes Microface. And so I'm giving you like the broad strokes, but it was a chance to work with Jamal, who I've known for the longest time. He was one of the first creators I got to work with at DC as a publicist, and just like a really nice guy, so talented, and just an amazing artist. And it was fun to collaborate with him. We had Ellie Wright on colors and Taylor Esposito on letters, and it's 40 pages of story. NPR is going to be selling it on their website, and I'm excited for people to read it. It's a fun meta romp that that plays with the idea of IP and heroism and the Golden Age, and I think it's got a lot more heart than maybe people might expect. So I'm looking forward to hearing what people think.
Yeah, and I mean, Planet Money has they're selling Microface T-shirts and decals and other kind of merch that you would normally see for an
Yeah,
IP.
it's loaded with Easter eggs too. If you're a Planet Money fan, there's like a ton of Easter eggs just about from the podcast.
No, it's been fun hearing you on those episodes, and I don't know how long it's been since you've done an episode for it, because obviously the comic's been in progress in terms of
Yeah, it's been a while since I think maybe they'll do a follow-up episode now that the comic is done, and they can talk to us about the process. That would be really fun. But the cool thing about Planet Money is that they want to explain to listeners about these economic things, but in the most fun way possible. So what's more fun than actually creating a comic? So, and I think when you finish the issue, it kind of springs you into this new world. So there's potential for more stories.
That's great. And also, honestly, as you know, and I know because of my listeners, and that, hey, people are looking at public domain characters all the time. Zdarsky is even doing
a great comic,
Substack comic, and everything, which is
I love
terrific.
Chip. Yeah, Chip's amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was very generous. He read Secret Identity, which I was blown away by. The fact the response from friends in the industry was really nice. Like Ed Brubaker blurbed it, so did Willow Wilson. And Chip read it, and these are busy people, like super talented people. So the fact that they read it was a blessing.
I mean, that's the thing. You're a pro, and again, this is your Secret Identity is your 7th novel. You've written a ton of comics. I always have ideas, and and some I've even shared with you.
Yeah,
and you've been very kind to give me feedback and stuff. But yeah, I've got friends who are like, well, everybody, can't they help you? I'm like, no, they're busy with their careers.
But your friends will help you. Your friend, that's the thing. You make friends, and people will help you and help you actualize what you want to do.
Absolutely, man. So, all right, Michael wants to know, and it's part of the fun of Microface. Does he have a really small face, or does he use the strange new power of the microwave? It's not microwaves. It's microphones, because this was
he has a helmet that has these big speakers, and he can throw his voice. He can literally tweet, like the sound effect from the Golden Age is tweet. And it's so bizarre now in the world where tweet is something completely different, but he can throw his voice, and he gets some kind of like a little bit of super strength, but he's really just a regular guy that can kind of, amplify his voice and scare you and kind of, throw you off. And it's when they mentioned it to me, I had a meeting with Robert and Kenny, the Planet Money hosts, and they said, okay, we got this character. His name is Microface. And I think I waited a second. My response was like, that is an unfortunate name. It's just not a great name. So, but it works. It's an audio superhero for a podcast making a comic book about a superhero. And one of the really touching things is that Kenny got to interview Alan Ulmer's daughter, and he got to talk to her, and she was very gracious, and she said that her dad would have loved this idea and he would have been really keen on seeing it. And so it was nice to, get her blessing, and that was really special, I thought.
Absolutely. And everyone should really, if you're interested in this, go to the Planet Money podcast feed and scroll down and find these episodes, because it's really fun. Alex is great on it, and it's because they're half serious and also having fun with it as well.
Yeah, it's just a blast. That's the fun part.
It's very informative and educational if you're thinking about this stuff. And of course, I don't know have you met Gamal Hennessy, the lawyer that is also helping people. I mean, and Gamal also, talks about in his both his website and his service as a lawyer to help people that want to maybe make a comic book and stuff. He's got a whole chunk about public domain heroes, and those Neater and Fiction House publisher. It's the same publisher of the mid 40s. A lot of their characters found themselves in the public domain, and this is Airboy and oh god, what's the Black Terror? Black Terror is the one that has the black. Like superhero Superman suit, but it has the skull and crossbones.
Yeah, the skull and crossbones. And I will say this, I don't want to spoil anything else from the story, but if you love those characters, if you love public domain heroes, this book will feed that. It's just got a lot of little nods and winks and hat tips to that era. And that was so fun to like research and put together, and kind of put it through the filter of a business story. How do you make this about things that maybe people would roll their eyes at, but could be interesting, like private equity or, like zombie companies and things like that. Like these things that I learned as I was researching it to make it a business or a Planet Money story. So that was really wild. And it's one thing, there's a little nod to Microface and Secret Identity. I threw in references to like my other stuff because I thought, why not? Like, why wouldn't Triumph publish the Black Ghost or, the Dusk or Microface? Like you might as well like do like the Segura expanded universe.
Why not? Absolutely, man. Yes.
Exactly.
Black Ghost, Comixology original, one of the last conversations that we had with Alex and stuff.
Yeah.
That's available. And Alex, I can't figure it out because I know if you have a Prime account, a lot of the Comixology originals are.
Yeah, if you have a Kindle
available.
Unlimited or Amazon Prime account or Comixology Unlimited, you can read it for free.
Yeah. So no,
Which
that's
is cool.
Absolutely, man. No, interesting times, definitely.
Yeah.
And also interesting opportunities as far as platforms. It seems like comics are right there with television streaming in terms of the amount of companies that are coming on the scene now and looking for content. And God, I mean, old names like Gareb Shamus is back and putting together a new thing, and
Yeah,
also brand new people.
we're just about to we're about to launch a book called The Awakened, and by we I mean me and Mike Moracy, who and Dean Kotz is the artist, and it's with this platform called Zest World. And I guess the shorthand is they're a newsletter community. You get an advance and you create the comic and you start posting it through your newsletters. It's similar to Substack. But they've got books coming up from like Pete Tomasi, Amanda Connor, Jimmy Palmiotti, and Phil Jimenez, like a bunch of great talents. And we're part of that first wave, which is wild. But The Awakened is Mike and I's take on, it sounds so general, but superheroes, but the superhero books that we really love, like the character-driven stuff that is much more noir than superheroics. It's like character-driven crime stories through the prism of superheroes. So kind of like books like Incognito and The Golden Age, the James Robinson book. Those are the kind of big influences on what we're doing. And so we'll be posting those through those newsletters and eventually collecting them in print. But for now, that's kind of where you can get it.
Zest World.
Yeah.
Very cool. And
Yeah.
no, it'll be fun. Mauricio, a great horror writer, so that's going to be fun, and a great sci-fi writer as well.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fun to watch him make superhero books for a change.
Yeah, we both have this passion for superhero characters, and we went back and forth, and we were like, well, let's just do our own. Until, that's been one of my things as a creator to begin with. Like, if I can't do somebody else's character, I'll just create my own version and kind of play with that. We have this wide expanse of ideas, and you might as well like carve out your own space.
Well, and also, you spent so many years at DC surrounded by the classic characters and stuff. So sure, I'm sure a lot of influences, came through, and why not? And again, I know, man. I honestly, and I'm sure you get them too. I'll get emails from friends who are like, "Oh man, I've got like the greatest Superman story, but I can't break through." And I'm like, "Well, Superman is an archetype." I'm like, right?
Yeah.
Follow Mark Waid's example with Irredeemable and the rest, and it's like, tell your Superman story the way you want to tell it, but call him something else. And I think that's great.
Yeah, and I think the challenge, and I had to deal with this a little bit with Secret Identity, is that you don't want all the characters to just feel archetypal, like archetypes. Like, I guess archetypal. Yeah, whoops, I'm tired. But someone like Jeffrey Carlisle could very easily be a J. Jonah Jameson cigar chomping Stan Lee riff, the boss at Triumph. But you have to tweak them enough so they feel three-dimensional and they don't feel like they're just ripped off from somebody else, or that you're just trying to kind of evoke something else. You want them to feel new and nuanced, and that's the art. That's like the challenge of the writing.
Speaking of J. Jonah Jameson and also your love of Spider-Man, I am literally the last person that finally saw the latest Spider-Man movie.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah,
it's amazing. Well, man, again, I don't know. I'm nervous about theaters. And
me too.
And that said, I bought it digitally and everything, and so I still haven't finished it. I'm really taking my time with it because I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, savor
it. I
love
the idea of J. Jonah Jameson as Alex Jones.
Yeah,
I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Wow, that's great. So
I was rereading. Well, I've been rereading them all, but I've been rereading with my son the Lee Romita run, the early days of the Lee Romita run, and Jonah is like the star. He just steals the show. I think his one-liners are. We just finished that that opening Green Goblin arc, which is that cover where it's like Green Goblin dragging an unmasked Peter Parker through the air, and I just saw his eyes widen as we were reading it. He was like, he knows his secret identity, and I was like, yeah, that's cool. That was cool. And now that's kind of taken for granted because we have so many tropes, and tropes are inverted and things are twisted. But back then, that was like the purity of surprise. Like, you look at that cover and it just pulls you in. But yeah, Jonah is like hilarious throughout those and continues to be one of the best characters in comics.
And it is interesting because, again, we've had, God, isn't it amazing now? We've had 23 years of Spider-Man movies when you think about
Remember
it.
when there was like the idea was that we'll never get a Spider-Man movie? It was like the rights were mired. Like Canon Films had the rights, and James Cameron had the rights, and it
Yes,
became this. And I thought, okay, we'll just never get a movie. But now we have these riches of like movie upon movie. Like it's pretty great.
absolutely. And also just how it really, like the compression of movie continuity.
Mhm.
Like you said, I mean, I mean, it's just, oh, he knows his identity. Well, that happens obviously in the first Tobey Maguire movie and everything.
Yeah,
But
but they really evoke the fear in the movie. I thought those
oh,
Raimi
absolutely. Oh,
films.
no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah,
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 absolutely. And no, it's great. It's just, it is interesting that we had years of buildup in the comics getting to those points and everything, or, God, the whole Captain Stacy arc.
yeah. I mean, he
And
didn't.
leading,
He died in what was it, Amazing 90. And it just built and built and built. And even the reveal of the Goblin's identity was not until issue 40 or so. So you've got, multiple appearances where he pops up as kind of this like menacing oracle and is involved in all these stories. And eventually he's revealed to be Harry's dad, which I can spoil that now. It's like decades ago. I think it's okay to spoil it. But yeah, it's just it's really amazing to see that all roll out as one.
and I'm glad that, and I saw in Ed's newsletter that he was promoting Secret Identity.
Yeah, that was nice of
That's
him. That
great.
was
A
really
groove
nice.
maker. And
That was like being blessed by the king of noir himself, of comic book noir.
100%. But
Yeah,
also, I'm really excited for Ed's. He's involved with Bruce Timm and Matt Reeves for this new Batman cartoon, and he's the story editor,
that's gonna be huge.
assembling the writers' room. And man, I know,
Cannot wait. Cannot wait for that.
and yeah, man. I mean, God, again, it's been 20 years since Ed's been writing Batman and shit, but it's like
I still go back to that run. I think it was a really strong, and it's still an underrated run. I think that was before Ed was Ed.
he and Greg at the same time on Detective, and
Yeah.
Sean Martinborough
Yep.
drawing
The Greg run
Detective
holds
stuff.
up really well too. I was rereading that recently.
I always give it up to them. Greg knows, from the start of our friendship, but Martinborough as well. I'm like, I haven't had Sean on the show yet, but my God, it was such a great, different take visually on
even the
Batman
color
comics.
palette on the Greg and
Yes.
Sean run was so unique and so different. The design, those Dave Johnson covers were magnificent.
Everything.
Yeah, and Ed did that was a great Batman run, and then to have and then Brian K. Vaughan I think did a run after Ed, or they were both kind of trying out for the Batman seat, and it was a really interesting era.
Absolutely, no, a lot of great stuff, and again, that's why these guys are now classic vets of the period, and this is just when they were getting the chance to play with the big toys.
Exactly.
So, well, there you go, Alex, and you know yourself. I mean, now playing with not only the big toys but also creating your own toys. Everyone should pick up. Secret Identity is available now. It's also an Audible, by the way. It's a very good Audible.
A really good narration. I mean, one of the things I was wondering about and was how is the audiobook narrator going to do these comic book sequences? But she did. The narrator Aida Relusco did a great job. The sequences sound like audio dramas. Like she does the sound effects, like the rain hitting the street, and she reads the captions in her like narrator voice. But I'm not explaining it well, but she does a great job of really like differentiating the comic book sequences and giving them meaning in how they complement the prose.
100%, no question they do. No, it really is. Congratulations, man.
Thanks, man.
7 is a charm. Absolutely. Secret Identity, everybody.
Thanks so much for having me, man.
100%. And also pick up the Latinx Marvel anthology.
Yeah, Comunidades. Yep.
And eventually, hopefully, maybe either this year or next, Microface will be coming out.
Should be in the next couple of weeks, and I'll tweet about it and let everyone know. I think it's at the printer. So, and because it's not like a direct market book, it doesn't need that 3-month window. Once it's there in the warehouse, they can put them up on the website, and people can start buying them.
That's outstanding. Yeah, check out Planet Money, everybody, and hear more about the Microface story and everything. But as always, buddy, great to see you, and
always good to see you, man. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Alex Segura, everybody. It's going to be an abbreviated week because I got a nice little word balloon it is a word balloon honor, actually. I was telling Alex about it off the air. Illinois State University is recognizing the podcast and me, and they've got a broadcast hall of fame. A lot of Chicago people went to Illinois State and cut their teeth, and also national people as well. And they're putting me in for word balloon, which is incredible.
Well deserved. Well deserved.
And so I'm going to be busy prepping for that. I have a speech. I mean, I felt like a baseball player. I got a call on a Friday, and it's like, hey, you're going in the Hall of Fame, and I'm like, wow, really? All right.
Who's gonna induct you? Your coach?
My faculty advisor, who became
That's
one of my
so
best
cool.
friends. Absolutely, no, it's great.
That's
And,
awesome.
yeah. So as a consequence, talk to Lemire, talk to Duggan. Those are likely the new podcast episode for this week, including Alex's conversation.
I'm in good company.
You might get a couple reruns in there as well this week to fill out the week. But please come back to wordballoon.com. There's always new stuff to listen to and talk about. So until next week,